here with Brittany Greer, founder and CEO of Rosie Riveters. Great opportunity to finally talk to you and get some of your thoughts out to, our partners, our families, our community members who follow us, who are involved with us, and who are potentially looking to grow with us. And really just take this moment for them to get to know you on a deeper level and to understand where the thought process behind Rosie Riveter comes from and your hopes for the future. And I know it sounds pretty cliche, right? Your hopes for the future, but you built something from the ground up and working in the trenches to see it grow and spread. With what? With what mission? With what purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited just to take our offline conversations online because I feel like we've had these dialogues a lot of times before. But no, I mean, our entire organization is driven by hope for the future. We're a nonprofit. We have a mission, right? And our mission is to change the fact that 28% of the STEM workforce is female and 5% of it are women of color in science and engineering fields. It's not good enough, right? The hope for the future is that we have a diverse STEM workforce that gets to bring everything that they have to the table and innovate for what tomorrow looks like. And I always say, I don't know what that tomorrow looks like, but I'm excited about the possibilities of having voices that weren't there before and ideas and concepts. I have a text chat with a group of my friends about, the lack of women's representation in medical research. It would be great if we had some more of that. Right? And so the work that we're doing every day is ultimately towards that goal, right? And we've got very particular approaches to making that happen, really rooting into a lot of the kind of just structure that women have been placed into as they pursue all careers, right? But particularly the impact that of women in STEM. And the exciting thing is it's working. So I can't really complain, right? So that makes the drive towards the hope exciting for what the possibilities of tomorrow look like, because who knows what the future holds. But if these girls that we're working with are a part of it, we're in good hands.
Yeah. So let's start from the foundation. What would you say is the foundation of Rosie Riveters? Are there pillars? Are there channels? What does the structure look like?
Yeah. So the four core focus areas of what we do are the building blocks of everything that comes afterwards, right? Early engagement. So we start at 4 and we go all the way through 18. But that early engagement is so critical and honestly a big missing piece in kind of the STEM education pipeline. We're working with these young women to build their confidence and their critical thinking and problem solving skills before the world tells them otherwise, right? We're building a foundation of their relationship to learning so that they can move through their educational journeys with the idea that they can get things wrong before they get them right, right? And they can take longer or take a different approach and find a space for themselves within STEM that maybe doesn't even exist right now because they're going to carve it out in their own way.
Yeah.
So early engagement is critical. Continued engagement is important. We pride ourselves on not being a one and done organization. We don't come in, do a project, and never see you again. We're going into communities to build relationships to look at how we can meet you at 5 and see you at 6. I just wrote a recommendation letter today for a student who joined us in 3rd grade and is now applying to fellowships and internships and everything else, right,
Wow.
in her junior year of high school. So continued engagement is really important. Additionally, we're looking at a space to have accessible programming, right? So we are not an if you build it, they will come. We're not a, hey, it's available, so it's there for everything you need. But looking at community-based partnerships and working with organizations who are doing what they do really well to ensure that we're not just available, but accessible to the communities that we're serving. Whether that's providing a program within the building of another organization or sending them a STEM kit. If we can't consistently engage with you and be accessible to you, then what's the point of what we're doing? And ultimately, the fourth pillar is making it exciting and fun, right? It's the innovative approach to our programming. It's the fact that our projects are designed for our participants to have a productive struggle, to have the opportunity to get things wrong before they get them right. And I can talk about all the data behind that, right? And why we do it that way. But the real magic of Rosie is not only, hey, I loved learning about chemistry and density or hydroponics or whatever it was,
Yeah.
but I did that and I built confidence in the fact that I didn't know about that before, right? And I maybe had some missteps along the way, but I have more knowledge now and I'm excited for the next opportunity when I don't know something in the future.
Absolutely.
And that really builds the building blocks of what we do, right? So early engagement, continued engagement, innovative program, and accessibility. And through that, we've been able to reach the 16,000 plus kids that we've done so to date, which is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. And nothing, nothing to bat an eyelash at for sure. What would you say though, in those four pillars has been the largest hurdle that you've come up against, and how did you move past it?
I'd say there's two that have been an ongoing dialogue that we've always worked to overcome with just new groups, right? The first is the critical importance of the early engagement. It's easy to say, hey, I want to go and engage where I see the most immediate ROI, right? I want to talk to a kid in their junior, senior year, put them in an internship and hire them. I want to talk to them in college and hire them. I get it, right? It's a lot faster. But the reality is we will have a lot more and we will have a lot more diversity if we start early. And yes, it's a longer game, but it's a more effective one, right? And so getting effectively, the lack of a better word, but the sale, right, of the investment early will give you a better ROI at the end, right? Is a dialogue that we have a lot, and we've come a long way with it. And we've got incredible organizations who very much understand that. But it's still a conversation we have today about the importance of that component of what we do,
Yeah.
and how critical it is to the next step, particularly for communities who haven't previously been represented in these spaces. The example I always give is if you offer an internship to a high need community and then you wonder why they don't register for it. Well, if the narrative their whole life has been that this is not an opportunity for them, or they didn't get to take the baseline classes to access it, or their parents don't think that it's something that is immediately tangible for their ROI as a household, right? Then the actual kind of uptake of that is not as great as it could be. Then if we start talking to children and families about it when they are kind of setting the horizon line of what high school after high school can look like, right? Whether it's an apprenticeship or a scholarship or whatever it looks like. But knowing that those resources are available allows you to access more opportunities until you get to that endpoint, which sometimes gets lost, but we're having that dialogue more. The other part of it is very much the accessibility side of things, right? We are consistently saying we do not need to reinvent the wheel here. We'd rather partner with a community organization who is doing what they do well, right? So that we can have the higher level of accessibility. I always use the example of Rosie is not in the business of feeding children, right? That's not what our mission has been set out to do. We critically understand the importance of feeding children and the importance of that in learning, right? So if we're working with a community organization who is helping to solve that problem and then building on their ecosystem so that we can do more, then we're actually we're greater than the sum of our parts, right? We get to have accessible programs in multiple levels, not only kind of physical location, but the ability to get the most out of the program as possible because those other resources are being taken care of.
Yeah, yeah. And I I think back to an example of, I think it was an event in the spring or summer of last year. It must have been spring, at one of the schools that you were doing a STEM night at, and a local food truck came and provided food food assistance to the families that were there, and none of any charge to them, and not directly connected to what you were doing at that school that night in terms of STEM. But again, it was that ecosystem of support that other partners provide in the space, not necessarily you having to do it, when somebody else can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's so that is the magic of Joyce Matthews, who sits on our board, who is a now 38-year veteran of the Fairfax County Public School System, who has worked in communities and provided resources, right? And we are one of those resources that she provides, and she is the conduit to those connection points. And so why would we not resource her? The answer is just figure out a way to do it, right? Like she is such an incredible human within this space. Like she keeps these connections with these girls forever and ever and feeds their families and made sure they had medicine in COVID. And like, she's what I have goosebumps talking about her, right? She's one of those people who you just resource, right, to do what she does because she's so good at it. But it's exactly that, right? We could go in and do a couple of events a year where we did all of that, or we could just do what we do really well and partner and champion those who are doing other things really well. And as a result, kids get even more opportunities and resources than us alone.
Um,
And really powerful ones at that.
Absolutely. And I love this idea of building a futures pipeline versus addressing the issue for a short-term solution. And yeah, definitely getting buy-in for that long term, especially when it is something that requires constant investment of time and resources and energy. I could see, the apprehension in many community partners and organizations and businesses to buy into that because you're responsible for numbers today.
Mhm.
And it's hard to provide those for long-term strategies unless
But it's also building community partnerships, right? We don't, one organization doesn't have to do it alone, right? They can work together towards that collective and making that difference in a community. It's also plugging our resources into maybe other organizations that they're working with and how do they interact from one point in that kind of journey pathway to another, um, which is hugely important, right? I want the organizations we're working with to continue to exist and succeed, right? And do what
absolutely.
they do well.
Mhm.
And so by being able to work together, we're not only broadening our impact, but we're broadening this space for organizations and initiatives and things like that to get involved with us sustainably, right, in a way that matters for them. And the other big component of that is the work that we're aiming towards this year, which is really kind of doing some longitudinal research studies and sharing that best practice of what we do with other organizations so they can duplicate it. And also just look to track impact and, maintain mission. Which is the whole point of what we do, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be a nonprofit. Is rooting back into how are we making that impact? How are we changing the fact that 28% is the workforce and 5% are women of color? And how are we making that change? And how are we documenting and tracking that data? So it's an ongoing thing, but it's a long time to track. It's not impossible. We just are navigating the best approach to it.
Absolutely. And bringing on the expertise of those like Joyce Matthews and other board members. I think of Zoraida and many others who've come on in the last few years of Rosie Riveters and are really helping to build that energy and build more of those relationships across state lines in a lot of ways. What are some of the ways that last year saw Rosie Riveters grow?
Oh my. Okay. So last year was a lot. The kind of soundbite that I've been talking about is we served from Orlando to Alaska. We served nearly 9,000 students within 2023 alone. And that came down to partnerships. It came down to the innovations of our board, right? I have a rock star board that I'm super proud of. And it came down to us really leading from a resource, how do we answer the resource limitations questions for our community-based partners, right? Our STEM kits, our programs, I always say the core model of them is always the same, but it is not that hard. It's usually a bit of a narrative shift and looking at kind of a timeline shift for each of those community partners for us to be accessible in a different community. And in the years since we started in 2016, we have figured out how to do that like I'm going to allude to our manufacturing conversation, which is what I can talk about in a second, to kind of assembly line precision. With, I would say we're hyper local with a national reach. And that's very much the approach that we had. So we were in Florida and Alaska and California and Texas and Ohio and everywhere in between. And that delivery was a combination of our military family programs in partnership with Blue Star Families and National Military Families Association, where we leveraged the mobility of military spouses and, quite frankly, the unbelievable talent of military spouses to expand into communities. We leveraged our STEM kits for an in-school space to solve the resource limitation of time, materials, and prep work for classroom teachers so that they were accessible and could be utilized across classrooms all over the US. And we did it through partnering with our corporate partners and other organizations through their missions of outreach, where we could not only deliver and do what we do well as a part of those ecosystems, but build relationships in new communities as a part of that. And so we have grown exponentially year on year. The year before, we served 3,500 students, and so this year we served 9,000. So it was a big jump, which is great. But really, it's partnerships. It's people's ideas coming together, and I can certainly talk about the incredible partnership with Zoraida and Florida Makes and the Girl Scouts, and that is going to only further our reach this year as we replicate it across multiple states. And it all has to do with answering the resource limitation question. What are the careers in your community's backyard?
Yeah.
What are the accessibility strain points? What are the resource strain points of that community to understand and connect to them? And how can we plug in our solutions to make that happen? And it's working pretty well. So I think
And where are they? Where is this young demographic? Where are they going to? Where is the trusted space for them? And I love that we can talk about that conversation.
Yeah.
We can talk about that partnership because you found a great one in Florida.
So then Florida, all the different programs are different. I'll talk specifically about the partnership with the Girl Scouts in this instance. So we're partnering with the Girl Scouts and the MEP networks. MEPs are manufacturing extension partnerships. They're a program of NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. And effectively, they operate across all 50 states and Puerto Rico to support manufacturers, right? So support production of things within the US and within those states, innovate, make things more efficient. How are we doing all of those things? And almost everything's manufacturing. Like we're making stuff across the country, right? Which is interesting. And similar to kind of the space ecosystem, almost every aspect of STEM is within those fields. So it's also great from that. But we're also working with the Girl Scouts, right? So the Girl Scouts I don't have to explain who the Girl Scouts are. They're a phenomenal organization with an incredible reputation who have done amazing work in building girls' confidence throughout history. And providing accessible programs to communities. One of the big reasons why we were interested in being a partner with them is the fact that they do bring in paid staff into high-need communities to be volunteers and recruit individuals to be volunteers for communities where the resource of time is not available to be a troop leader. And that was a thing for us, right? That if you're a volunteer-based organization, how are you ensuring that the resources to volunteer are being covered in communities who do not have them? And Girl Scouts very much answers that question. But then additionally within that, so they have this incredible ecosystem of girls, this consistent network, which is awesome, right? But in the instance of Florida, who we were working with, we worked with the Girl Scouts of Citrus and their CEO, Marianne Barry, who was introduced to us by Zoraida Velasco, who is the Senior Vice President at Florida Makes. And it came from conversations, right? Zoraida had recently gotten back involved in her Girl Scout troops, had a relationship with Marianne, was very interested in the early engagement component for workforce development within manufacturing. Had known what Rosie had done. We were introduced by another board member, Malvina Gasco from Boeing, right? So it's all interconnected. And Zoraida brought myself and Marianne together to discuss what this might look like. And Marianne had shared with us that the least done badges by their troop leaders were the STEM ones because they just didn't feel confident in facilitating the content. It's the same stuff that we work with classroom teachers, right? A lot of times people think they have to be an electrical engineer to talk about electricity. You don't, right? And Rosie has really worked to make that dialogue, those resources accessible, and to not only build children's confidence in these skill sets, but also adult confidence by making things plug and play, by taking away all the resource restrictions and allowing them to happen. And so we said, let's do what we do for school teachers, right? But instead of looking at the resources of SOL time and prep time and getting materials and all that, let's answer it for troops. And so part of that is aligning our projects to the objectives of badges, right? Providing all the materials to complete those activities, giving the teachers the step-by-step actions to take, right? And also giving them resources to further explore if they want to. And then working with manufacturing to say, okay, now let us tell the narrative, not only through these projects. So let's take 4 Forces of Flight and Mechanics of Flying, where we do with the Fling Flyer, which is a Girl Scout badge. Well, let's talk about that in relationship to manufacturing. How are you producing those things? How is that design engineering loop work? How are we connecting them to careers? How are we talking about women who work in those fields to reinforce those opportunities? And so through those conversations, we built out the program called Rosie Explores Manufacturing, where we took 4 of our existing Rosie Riveters projects, solved the access solutions for 4 different STEM badges for the Girl Scouts, put everything into a box, went to our community partners, so Boeing, Manufacturing USA, the LIFT, and the Arm Institute funded 600 kits for free for Girl Scouts in Florida, and the opportunity for us to go to the Phenom conference, which is the big national Girl Scout conference, and talk about this. So at that session, through Marianne's kind of support of us having access to it, I ran 2 workshops for troop leaders across the country that was called Don't Be Afraid of the STEM Badge, right? Which, that was the name of it, right?
Let's
So
put it bluntly.
was use resources like Rosie Riveters, right, as you want to, whether it's a kit or just the stuff online. But we also went through, how do you use ChatGPT, and how do you find easy resources to access for your community, and how do you find partnerships to go in and allow them to help you to facilitate the badge? Just how do you do it, and how do you make it less scary, and how do you give them the confidence to say you do not have to be an electrical engineer to do this? Your passion for being there for these kids makes you qualified, and there are resources out there to give you the technical language if that's what you want, right, for these young students to access it. We then took that to Buffalo and talked to the MEP networks, and now we're replicating that in states across the country. So more coming online about that. You'll see it on our pages if you follow us. But really looking at ecosystems and connecting them, maximizing impact, and allowing that to happen. It's the same work we do in schools. So we're actually working with Girl Scouts of Southern Alabama in the same program, but in a different format. So they have 2 really cool delivery models. They've got Girl Scout camps that they facilitate, that one of those camps is completely free to kids who wouldn't otherwise access camp. And the other is they go into schools during school time with paid staff troop leaders to facilitate Girl Scout experiences for kids during lunch, which is one of the best access points that could possibly exist. And so what are we doing for them? Auburn's MEP is supporting Rosie Riveters to facilitate those hands-on content, like those hands-on STEM activities for them to do within that. We're doing train the trainer with their staff, so it's easy to facilitate. I'm not going in and staffing Alabama, right? I'm using awesome people in Alabama to do what they're doing. I'm not going in and guessing what the best place to go in. I'm working with an organization who has been doing it and doing it effectively. And then we're working with a partner where we can say, manufacturers in this area, A, here's who they are, right? B, here's what you could do with them. And C, they care enough about you at 8 as a brownie that they want to pay for this for you, that they want you to come and work for them. And that's why we put our organization's logos on the work that we do. I want them to know that you invested in them, that you want them to work for you. And that matters in a big way. And knowing what I can do, and knowing that, oh, you have a scholarship or an apprenticeship or those things. And yeah, maybe I'm not applying for them when I'm 8, but now I know I can, and you want me to. And it becomes my narrative and my experience versus this abstract thing that then you tell me is mine later, but never really was mine. And that's the difference of those connections and those ecosystems. But those relationships got built from people who are doing great things, right? And having dialogues and making connections and building impact versus us kind of like sitting in our silo, just pumping stuff out.
I want to harken back to something you just said, because I think it's really, really, really essential to what Rosie Riveters does. And you just spoke about two different case studies, if you will. You spoke about Florida and you spoke
Mhm.
about Alabama, but it was not a one size fits all.
No,
And how incredibly important is that?
huge. Nothing is one size fits all, right? But the thing I'm truly most proud of with Rosie, right, is that we're not offering a one size fits all, but we haven't overcomplicated that. It doesn't mean that every single thing is this bespoke, laborious process. We figured out how to do the STEM education part really well, how to make it fun, how to make it exciting, how to make kids feel good about themselves doing it, and how to build their confidence through those tools. That core project doesn't change. What changes is effectively the box it's put in. And what I mean by that is, in an ideal world which is what we do with our military families, I take 2 hours to do a project and it's my happy place, right? The kids get to mess it up and build it and change it and innovate it, and we get really cool stuff and it's amazing. But we're not making the perfect the enemy of the good, right? We're not going to stop a kid from getting to interact with that because they don't have 2 hours in the place that's accessible to them.
Mm.
So in a school format, that same project we took out 2 hours on, we make sure that we're aligning it with a learning standard that's happening in the classroom, right? So we're supporting teacher time to provide that project. And the 45 minutes, maybe sometimes 30, that we get during a school day for kids to do STEM, right, is taken up just by the project, just by the build, because we've leveraged the other resources that are there by listening so that they can carve out that time and be effective, right? The same project is going to go into the Girl Scout box, but the adaptation is, how does the troop leader make it accessible for their timeline? What do they need to do and what do they need to hit? And how do we change the narrative? And the other cool thing about it is those same three projects can tell the stories of multiple industries, right? It's just about how we're telling the story and making the connections. So I can take my ArtBot and talk about AI ethics. I can take my ArtBot and talk about circuits. I can take my ArtBot and talk about electromagnetism, right? And how the motor works within it. And we can break that all down and connect those to companies and connect those to women in STEM careers who are utilizing those skill sets. But we don't have to change the product, and we don't have to change the work that we did to make sure that it's age appropriate, that it works, that it's fun, right? That it's hackable by our team without them, keeling over from too much labor, right? Like all of those things happen. But once that work is done, we're just changing the box it goes into. And as a result, we are not a one size fits all, but we're a plug and play, right? Of things that we know work. And adapting as we go, right? We're constantly innovating and making tweaks where they're needed and then putting that through. And absolutely our programs now are better than the very first program we ever did. And if they weren't, we'd be doing something wrong in terms of learning and what we're doing. But it's the same thing we work to embody our students with. What is the productive struggle? How are you learning? How are you improving? How are you innovating? But the accessibility component is usually just the box that gets delivered in.
Yeah.
And it's not that hard at all.
Yeah.
Like to do it that way. And it's why we've had not only the growth that we've had, but the longevity with the partners that we have, right? Because we're not adding more labor to their lives, right? We're doing what we do well, they're doing what they do well, and we're listening to what those access point changes are.
Yeah, I love that. Every stakeholder, every partner, every volunteer feels heard through this process because every instructor, every educator that you interact with has buy-in to the process and feels like the process fits their environment and is not just well, this is what we did in Florida, so we're going to do it here too, because your environment has to be the same, right? No.
Yeah, and the United States is a country of many countries, quite frankly. I don't know, but it's different communities and different access points and different resources. but every place has incredible talent, right? And it's just about making sure that they have the resources to have confidence in that talent
Mhm.
and know where to access additional resources so that they can use that talent.
Yeah.
And
Even more essential to that is, I think back to some of the events where you've had speakers come in
mhm,
to the courses, whether it's the military children who are, getting a guest speaker or, something in a local school, but you're pulling women in STEM from communities. And and I know I cannot underrepresent how important that is because as a young mind,
mhm,
seeing a mentor or inspiration, knowing that they came from somewhere near you versus someone from New York City or
yeah,
DC only, like, oh, I can only be successful, I can only have this STEM career if I live in these areas. No, there's somebody in my backyard, maybe from my
yeah.
same background, who's achieved this.
Yeah, I think the backyard conversation is really important, right? Because there are students across the country who have never left the city limits of their town, and that's fine. And there are tons of job opportunities within stone's throw distance of them in a lot of those ecosystems, or at least within their state, right? That we can find access to. And having somebody say, hi, you may not see me all the time, but I'm here and I did it. And this is the resources that I use. And this is the job that I do. And this is what I want to tell you more about it. Right. I even work with narrative with those individuals. So I'll say to somebody and they'll say, hey, I'm an engineer. And my answer is, what kind of engineer are you? Right. There's a million of them. and having the idea that kids can open up their minds to that, right? I can be a human systems engineer. I can be a mechanical engineer. I can be a chemical engineer. I can be all of these different things. And I can do that in that building down the road that I drive by every day of my life, but don't actually know what happens in it. One of the narratives I hear a lot from the within the manufacturing industry is, oh, kids will go and work at McDonald's, but they don't know to come and work at the factory. And they pay 4 times as much, right? And it's like, but they know what happens in that building. They know what the job looks like. Their parents know what the job looks like and they know how to access it. So if we can start to tell the stories of the people working in that building, now when I drive by the building every day, I think of the project I built and the
Mhm.
story I heard and the opportunity that it holds for me. And I might even drive by and go, oh, I can do an apprenticeship there, or I can get a scholarship from there, whatever that looks like. And it's a build out of the common thing we hear all the time. You can't be what you can't see,
Oh,
right? And you got to see it. And you not only have to see it, but you also have to, it's not just seeing it, it's knowing what you can use to get there, right? And those are the things that all come together to be really important. It's not just, oh, I read a story about this woman who did this thing and that was cool. Oh, she's from the same state as me, right? Emily Calandrelli from Emily's Wonder Lab. She has a TV show on Netflix that she did, which is adorable, right? It's adorable and great and informative, right? I actually was talking to a girl in Canada who told me she watched Emily's Wonder Lab, which is why she knew about the density, right? And all these things interconnect. She's from West Virginia, right? And I think the story and the work that she does in her community to talk about the fact that she's from West Virginia, right? And that she went to school there and she then went to MIT,
mm,
right? Is powerful because she came from the same community in the same neighborhood as you. And she went and took this journey in this pathway. And she's going to tell you how she did it. And hopefully, if you want to take that same pathway, you can. Maybe you don't want to, but now you know that it's a possibility for you too, right? And that those stories are powerful and are important and they do matter. And they matter from the breadth of it, and they matter at the breadth of different fields, right? Not everybody wants to work in a lab. That's fine. Some people really want to work in the lab and that's their best happy place. Those two people don't have to be the same person, but they're probably going to be in the same Rosie program.
mhm.
And so that's why with Rosie, we talk about the breadth of STEM, right? We're not just computer science or just engineering. There's places where you can go and do that. And I love that that exists, but you might build circuits one day with us and build edible water bottles with chemistry the next, right? And the goal is that you may not love everything, but you're going to get to have your hands in everything. And through the whole timeline, I want you building confidence in yourself as a part of that. And I want to make sure we're connecting you with those real women in STEM and those stories. And that's one of the things we worked on this past year with funding from Society for Science, was taking what we do in our kind of perfect classes, right? Our military family classes that are 2 hours long and have a role model come in and all of those things, which is great. And how do we infuse that in every other project that we do, right? And so we've compartmentalized their stories and captured their video interviews and are translating that more through everything that we're doing because it's so incredibly powerful. And we have new partnerships coming on the line with that, which is great and amazing, right? But if you're a woman in STEM, tell your story. Just tell your story. If you want to tell your story with us, call me, call Adrian. We'll put you on the thing for 15 minutes. You can share it, right? We just want to share more of the stories because they matter and they're impactful. And if you can start to see yourself in that story, is when you really get to, drive towards a goal. I'm a big believer in horizon lines, right? What does tomorrow look like for you? What are you aiming towards? What are you valuing for yourself for that next part of things? How are we resourcing you to that? Not just that we don't know what tomorrow holds. No, you owe it to yourself, and you have enough, you have all of the worth in the world to think about your tomorrow. And the more that we can support what your tomorrow is, the more we can track incredible humans into careers that are going to change what tomorrow looks like, right? And so we just want them to have that for themselves. And other people's stories are an important part of that.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Goodness. Well, I hope it gives everyone, it just gives me goosebumps. So it's a reminder that no matter what you do in the industry or whatever industry you're in, your job is part of a bigger picture and it matters. And to some little girl's eyes, that's a future that she never saw herself being able to obtain. So sharing that is incredibly essential to uplifting this next generation. That comes from every background and every ethnicity and every belief system. Well, Brittany, I want to continue to have these conversations. We have so many other topics to discuss, and so let's continue to have them, and hopefully we can continue to inspire others to have them where they are too, to be a part of this movement and the need to support our young women in STEM.
I look forward to it. And as I always say, if you work at any job anywhere in STEM, I promise you are somebody's dream.